Hello everyone, this is Mr. Cole. Thanks for watching this homework video for U.S. history. And for this particular video, you're going to want to have in front of you our packet for this week on Civil War backgrounds and causes, which has a place for you to take notes here on these vocabulary terms. So please follow along with this video, add your notes, and please let me know about any questions that come up for you as you're watching. So to start with, I'm just going to review a couple of terms that we talked about earlier this week. First of all, the Supreme Court. This is an important thing to keep in mind because it's going to relate to some important topics for the rest of the school year. The Supreme Court is, of course, part of the judicial branch. It's our nation's highest court, and their job is to interpret the laws, to determine if laws are or are not constitutional. And the court is supposed to be made up of 9 judges. They're called justices. And you can see a little picture here of the courtroom at the Supreme Court. And you can see that up front there's 9 chairs because the 9 justices sit there and listen to the lawyers present the cases for each side. And then those 9 justices vote to decide which side wins the case. So the vote might be 5-4, 6-3, 8-1, etc. And this picture here is of the current members of the Supreme Court, except for this gentleman right here. Justice Antonin Scalia died in early 2016. At the moment I'm recording this, there are still just 8 people on the Supreme Court. The Senate has not moved forward with the voting process to approve the person President Obama selected to replace Justice Scalia. And so until they do move forward, whether it's with President Obama or our next president, we will still have just 8 justices, which means that they can have ties, which then reverts back to the lower court's decision. And that relates to this slide here because cases don't generally start at the Supreme Court. They are appealed from lower courts. And this means that someone has issued a request or a complaint to change a decision from a lower court. And these appeals are not always accepted, but if someone has a good reason and a judge thinks that their case should be revisited, then an appeal can move up to a higher court and can, in some cases, reach the Supreme Court. And this related to our topic from earlier this week on the Supreme Court case from 1857, Dred Scott versus Sandford. So please refer back to that homework assignment for a lot more details and specifics on that case. But the overall ruling that's important to keep in mind is that the court ruled that African Americans are not citizens and were never intended to be citizens based upon the Constitution or the Declaration of Independence. And so therefore, again, in the opinion of the Supreme Court in 1857, they ruled that African Americans don't have the rights of citizens, which includes being able to sue someone in court. And so the court ruled that not only would Dred Scott not be allowed to be set free, but in fact he didn't have the right to even be in court suing someone in the first place. And of course this is a racist decision, but it just shows us the thinking that was going into the Supreme Court back in the years right before the Civil War began. So now we're going to continue with some vocabulary words more specifically related to the Civil War. And this word abolition or abolitionist refers to ending slavery. So abolishing slavery was the goal of abolitionists. They wanted to achieve abolition. And an abolitionist was someone who supported or fought for ending slavery. And the word emancipation then refers to freedom for enslaved people. The verb to emancipate means to set free. And our next word is secession, or to secede. And so the 11 southern states seceded, which means that they separated or withdrew from the Union, from the United States. They wanted to establish their own country where they could maintain slavery. And so when those states seceded, that led to the Civil War. And you can see them here in the map, these gray states here in the South. And the next few terms are going to refer to laws passed by the government and how they related to slavery. And these are laws and issues of slavery that show us how the country was dealing or not dealing with this issue leading up to the Civil War. And as we're going to see, these compromises or these agreements didn't really solve the problem, and that's why we end up having a war break out in 1861 over the issue of slavery. And so the first one here is the Missouri Compromise of 1820, and you can see this map up here, which is reminding us that the United States was expanding westward. And one issue that came up was whether or not, as the country got bigger, as the country expanded west, would slavery be allowed in the West or not? And so in 1820, this was a debate, and when the debate occurred, there was finally a compromise, and here was what this compromise stated. 2 new states were being admitted to the Union, to the United States, and so Missouri, right here in the middle of the map, was entered as a slave state, and then Maine, up here in the northeast, was entered as a free state. This way there would be some balance. You're adding 1 slave state and 1 non-slave state. And then this line was drawn here, 36 degrees north. This was called the Missouri Compromise line of 1820, and basically was supposed to, and this would change later, but supposed to state that north of the line, the territories here north of the line would not have slavery, and that south of the line, slavery would be allowed. So this is a way that the North and South and the entire United States government is trying to compromise on the issue of slavery so that it doesn't blow up into a bigger issue like a war. And then there was another compromise, this time in 1850, and this time there was 5 parts to this compromise. So you had California entered as a free state, and now instead of that line being drawn that says, well, in the North there's no slavery, in the South there is, now the issue is going to be decided by popular sovereignty, which means that people can vote to decide in their own state or their own territory. So that's giving, in some ways, more rights to the people in different states or territories, but of course allowing a vote on slavery is, of course, very much obstructing the freedoms and rights of the enslaved people. And the third part of this was that it ended the slave trade in Washington, D.C. Part of this compromise was a strict fugitive slave law, which I'll talk about in just a moment. And this also settled some border problems between New Mexico and Texas. So again, we're seeing that there's some compromising happening here about slavery, which is just pushing off a war or a bigger problem, which is going to come in just about 10 years. So it's better for the short term, but things will get worse down the line. So back to this fugitive slave law of 1850. This law was a part of the Compromise of 1850. What this law said was that it basically made you responsible or required you to help catch a runaway slave. In other words, if you were aware of an enslaved person that had escaped, in particular in the North as well as the South, you were responsible for assisting in that person being captured. And if someone did not comply, in other words, if you didn't help catch the runaway slave that you were aware of, you could be fined up to $1,000 or put in jail for 6 months. And of course, that was a lot of money back in 1850. And Northerners in particular, for the most part, hated this law because this now makes them part of the slavery system. It's legally requiring people in the North, where at this time there was not slavery, it's requiring them to still participate in helping return an enslaved person back to the person who owns them in the South. And another law that was passed in 1854 was called the Kansas-Nebraska Act, and this separated these territories here and again determined that slavery would be an issue that was decided by popular sovereignty in each state or territory. Again, popular sovereignty means the people have the choice, or the people have the power through voting. And in this case, they're talking about either voting for or against slavery. For our next terms for sectionalism, please go back and see page 12. We had some notes on that from our homework the other night. And we will come back to states' rights and amendments to the Constitution later in the unit. So stay tuned for those terms. And our last two terms here are just going to remind you about the two sides in this war, the two sides that were fighting against each other. The first side I'm going to talk about is the Confederacy, and this was the name for that group of 11 states that seceded or separated from the Union to create their own country. They declared they would no longer be part of the United States, that in fact they were going to start their own country called the Confederacy, and that's these 11 states here down in the South where they separated for many reasons, but the overarching reason, as we've talked about, was in order for them to maintain slavery in their particular states. And the war ended up being between the Confederacy and the Union, or the North. And there's sort of two parts to the Union. The yellow states here in the northeastern part of the United States were Union states that were free states. In other words, they did not have slavery. And then there was a few states here in orange, Missouri, Kentucky, and Maryland, that were slave states. They had slaves, but they did not secede. They did not join in the Confederacy, so they remained as part of the United States or as part of the Union. So keep those two sides in mind as we move forward in our discussion about the Civil War. That's the two sides we're talking about, the North, or the Union, and the South, the Confederacy, as they go to war in the Civil War beginning in 1861. So that's all the vocabulary terms for now. Please double check to make sure you've taken accurate and complete notes so that you'll be able to use these terms moving forward on our next activities. And please don't hesitate to send me an email or come see me during office hours or during class if you have any questions. Thank you very much.